This is an interesting question. Talk about James Cannon versus Jay Lovestone. Very interesting figures, right? Now, I would be curious. I guess I'll circle back to this about why you might be asking this question, right? Because this is something that comes up with Trots a lot. This is a part of the Trotskyites will justify themselves with these references, but I'll get back to that. So the Communist Party of the United States was formed. There was a lot of turmoil, but eventually they formed the Communist Party. There were, the year of 1927 and 1928. Those are the years in which Stalin solidified the line of the Communist International. Right, Lenin died, and after the death of Lenin, there were three, not two, three political tendencies that emerged. There was Bukharin, and Nikolai Bukharin. He had the line of the right opposition. Leon Trotsky had the line of the left opposition, and Stalin had the centrist position. Nikolai Bukharin's position was that they should continue the new economic policy permanently and sign peace treaties with the West and seek foreign investment on a capitalist basis because they were too weak to have a socialist planned economy. Trotsky's position was the left opposition, and it was for full militarization of the Soviet economy as they sponsored revolution around the world in the name of permanent revolution. So he wanted to fully militarize and continue military communism as they prepared to spread communism all over the world. Bukharin wanted to permanently continue the new economic policy and the free market policies and seek foreign investment from capitalist countries and sign peace treaties with Western capitalist countries because they were just too poor to have socialism. So Trotsky was defeated first. The left opposition position of Trotsky didn't have very big following, and Stalin aligned with Bukharin against Trotsky. And then there was a much bigger fight between Stalin and Bukharin that happened. And then in 1928, the Communist International held its 6th World Congress, where they declared class against class. And they declared the doctrine of the third period, which was that after World War I, you'd had the revolutionary upsurge of the period of revolutions that followed World War I. That, there had been the Russian Revolution, there had been a mass attempted revolution in Germany, attempted revolution in Hungary, all these so there'd first been a mass period of revolution. Then in the 20s, you had the period of capitalist stabilization. And then they were seeing in 1928 the beginning of the capitalist crisis that had happened that was starting to become the Great Depression. And they argued that they were entering the third period, which was the period of socialist revolution in the Western countries. And it was also the period of socialist industrialization, meaning that they would have government-directed mobilizations to build up the economy, right? And that was what they were arguing. And that's what Stalin did with his 5-year plans. He used state central planning, not the military, but state central planning to rapidly industrialize. And they did bring in foreign, partnerships, General Electric, Ford Motor Company, various Western, they hired the Koch brothers' dad, Fred Koch, to be the chemist, and they built a state-run economy by bringing in foreign technicians, partnering with some Western companies. And then the communist movement in the Western countries, got very, very radical in its rhetoric. And it targeted the Social Democrats, saying the Social Democrats were the main threat. They were holding back revolution, and that they called them social fascists. And they were building mass movements of unemployed people, to demand jobs and housing and calling for socialist revolution. And that was they call the third period. That was the ultra left period of the Communist International. And I mean, they did amazing things during those years. In fact, that's when they probably did their best work, was when they did their mass unemployment marches, International Unemployment Day on March 6th, where thousands and thousands of people gathered all over the world to protest, for the rights of the unemployed. They built unions that were independent of the American Federation of Labor, and they organized in the South. And in America and in Western Europe and in Germany and many places, the third period was the period in which the communist parties of the world did some of their most amazing work. And part of the reason they did that amazing work was there was an economic crisis all over the capitalist world, but there was also, at that time, there was rapid industrialization. The Soviet Union's economy was booming, and many unemployed people were trying to get jobs. There were lines around the block of Americans, when they recognized the Soviet Union, of Americans trying to get jobs in the Soviet Union because their economy was booming. Many engineers, scientists, skilled people, were in the Soviet Union. So the third period, that was Stalin. When Stalin solidified his political line, Bukharin was defeated. Trotsky had previously been defeated. So in the American Communist Party, there had been two factions, and the factions in the American Communist Party were not based on ideology. And this is interesting. If you read Stalin's speech to the American Communist Party, or speech to the CPUSA, speeches to the Communist Party USA, Stalin calls out both the leader of one faction was a guy named Jay Lovestone, who is a labor union guy, labor union organizer from the Bronx. He was, I believe, he was born in. He was a He was a Jewish American from the Bronx. I think he was born in Lithuania, and he was a communist organizer. He was a boxer. He was an amateur boxer, and he was a labor union organizer, and he was a communist or whatever. And he was just this well-known communist organizer, Jay Lovestone. And then there was William Z. Foster, and William Z. Foster had been the leader of the Steelworkers Union, and led the Steelworkers strike of 1919. And he eventually joined the Communist Party. And so Jay Lovestone and William Z. Foster were in kind of a power struggle, and nobody knew what the power struggle was really about. I have a podcast I did where I go into great detail about William Z. Foster's life, where Brent Lengel kind of interviews me about the life of William Z. Foster. Those two factions, nobody knew what they were fighting about. It was simply, are you loyal to one guy or loyal to the other? It was not a principle. Factions are different than tendencies, right? A political tendency can exist within a party, but a tendency is like you have a particular line, whereas a faction, right? A faction is simply based on nepotism. It's just, you're my friend, I'll take care of you, you take care of me. It's I like you, I don't like you, right? So factional, these were factions. It was two big factions. And William Z. Foster was aligned with James Cannon, and James Cannon was a guy who ran the International Labor Defense, and he was known for defending political prisoners. When someone would get arrested for being a communist, which was very common back then, he would organize their defense, and he would find a lawyer, and he would organize. That was James Cannon, and he was the head of the International Labor Defense, and he was a well-known writer and intellectual, and he was just a long-time socialist agitator. William Z. Foster was the labor union organizer, and they were one faction. It was Foster Cannon, and then Jay Lovestone was this labor union boss, labor union guy from the Bronx, and kind of a tough street fighting guy. And then he was aligned with this guy named John Pepper. And John Pepper was a Hungarian guy who had, after the Russian Revolution, there'd been an uprising in Hungary. He'd been part of it. He moved to the Soviet Union, and then the Soviet Union sent him to America. And so John Pepper lived in America, and he was like a liaison between the Soviet Union and the American Communist Party. And he had like 20 different names or something, and he was frequently going to the Soviet Union on fake passports, and he was, I don't know. But anyway, John Pepper and Jay Lovestone were one faction. And William Z. Foster and James Cannon were the other faction. it's interesting because William Z. Foster and James Cannon were both Irish Americans from Catholic families. And Jay Lovestone and John Pepper were both foreign born. John Pepper was a Hungarian, and Jay Lovestone was a Jewish guy born in Lithuania. And they had a rivalry with each other. And the Communist Party in the 1920s was very lost in what it believed, right? It wasn't clear. So, I mean, they were just very confused. They didn't quite know what to do because the communist movement overall didn't know what to do. Lenin had died, and so there was the fight going on, and there were the Trotsky wanted this, and Stalin wanted this, and Bukharin wanted this. And there was a whole bunch of, they didn't really know what they were doing. And the 1920s, you read about the 1920s, before 1928 and 1929, the Communist Party USA was very confused. They did not know what they were doing. They were trying to organize labor unions and be in opposition to the reformist AFL. They were trying to form a farmer labor party, right? They went to the convention of the Farmer Labor Party, and they tried to form a national party, and there was like a big factional fight with the Farmer Labor Party. They tried to support Robert La Follette, the populist politician. They were supporting Robert La Follette, and he actually said some good things about the Bolsheviks, and so they were trying to be sympathetic to La Follette and the Farmer Labor Party, and all. They were very confused, and they went back and forth. So John Pepper, people often reference that John Pepper put forward the thesis that they shouldn't fight for communism in America because it was too foreign, right? And again, that was correct, right, in a way, but it was like, the thing was, the Communist International, it was like, this was a frequent problem, was that they would say something that was just kind of like basic, and then all the American communists would outdo each other in trying to take it to the most crazy extreme they possibly could, right? So like during the late 1930s, the communists were told to be patriotic. So then Earl Browder took it to extreme crazy lengths and eventually liquidated the Communist Party, and it was the Communist Political Association, and they were Marxist Jeffersonians instead of Marxist Leninists, and that they took it to extremes. So there's many examples of this. So like the thing that always gets accredited to John Pepper is that he at one point he said, we're a precursor to a communist revolution in America is there's going to have to just be a general upsurge. And he said that the general upsurge, so awful. He said the general upsurge of the third American Revolution, right? He said there was the American Revolution of 1776, there was the Civil War, the Second American Revolution. There was going to be the third American Revolution, which would like be an uprising that would set the stage for eventually having a communist revolution. And he said the third American Revolution would have elements of, of Danish cooperatives, Ku Klux Klanism, and Bolshevism. And it's like, what? You're going to have a Ku Klux Klan revolution? And people are like, that was particularly nuts. And the Lovestone group was not as anti-racist. I mean, the fact that they wanted to have a Ku Klux Klan revolution, that was like an offhand comment that was widely ridiculed, but that was one thing that there was a clear political difference around, is that they didn't believe in the black question, right? They didn't appreciate how the Communist International directed them to support black liberation. So that was one thing. But overall, Foster Cannon and Lovestone Pepper, it was not clear what they disagreed about. Okay. And there was a lot of confusion. They were illegal, and then, they were legalized, and they became a legal political party. And there was a big fight. They wanted to stay illegal as an organization because they thought they fetishized illegality. And there was a big fight where they said no. Lenin, the Bolsheviks said no. The Communist International said no. If you can have a legal communist party, you need to do it, right? You never create any unnecessary barrier between the working class and yourself. And that there was a fetish for illegality in the early Communist Party. And there was all kinds of weird confusion. But anyway, so 1929, they had, they called it the Runaway Convention of the Communist Party, where Lovestone won out. And basically, in Russia, they had the 6th World Congress of the Communist International, and they voted to do the third period line, right? That they were going to fight the Social Democrats, class against class, all of that. And Jay Lovestone, the leader of the American Communist Party, said, we're not going to do that. No, it doesn't apply to America. We're going to do our own thing. Now, we're not going to follow the Soviet Union. So Stalin accused Jay Lovestone of American exceptionalism. And that's where the phrase American exceptionalism comes from. Jay Lovestone refused to follow the Communist International's line and go along with Stalin's political line. And so Jay Lovestone took the Communist Party in a new direction. And the Soviet Union said, no, can't do that. And so Jay Lovestone, even though he had the majority at the 1929 convention, basically the Soviet Union stepped in and he was overruled. So Jay Lovestone's followers left the Communist Party, and that was about half the membership. And that was big. They lost a lot of people in 1929 when their national convention voted to go one way and the Soviet Union told them they had to go another way. And so after the 1929 convention, Jay Lovestone and his followers were out, and they basically announced that they supported Bukharin and the right opposition. And then what remained was the Foster faction. William Z. Foster ascended. He was the leader of the Communist Party. However, his close ally, James Cannon, had been forming a secret Trotskyite faction. And so James Cannon eventually broke away and formed, the Trotskyites. And so you had three communist groups. You had so the Trotskyites, they were called the Communist League for a while, and then they became the Workers' Party and eventually the Socialist Workers' Party. And then the Lovestonites, they called themselves the Communist Party Opposition, and they called them the Lovestonites. So there's an old joke, right? If everyone you don't like has a name that ends in ITE, you just might be a communist, right? If you're in the Communist Party, you hated the Trotskyites and the Lovestonites and the Shachtmanites and the Marcyites anyway, it's very stupid. But so James Cannon was a soapbox agitator. He was a long-time socialist, street preacher and organized for political prisoners, etc. Whereas Jay Lovestone was a trade union boss. And Jay Lovestone, the more you read about him, organizing a labor union in this country was illegal in many states. And labor unions were often, they had to do illegal things, okay? Strikes involved a lot of, picket line violence and breaking windows and getting into fights with scabs and all of that. The more you read about Jay Lovestone, I don't want to, because I'm not saying this was necessarily a bad thing. This was how the world was at that time. This was the age of sweatshops. This was the age of strike breaking. And this was the time where it was very hard to be a labor organizer. Okay. But Jay Lovestone was like a union thug type, right? He was not, a mass public speaker. He was, he worked in the back room. He made alliances, backroom deals with labor leaders, and he knew how to maneuver within the labor movement to, beat up scabs, and, he fought dirty. He was a dirty union guy. He was a union thug, right? He was a union guy who knew how to fight dirty. Let me just put it that way. That was his MO, right? William Z. Foster had been a national celebrity. He was the leader of the Steelworkers Union. He was this organizer of the Steelworkers Union. Jay Lovestone was this boxer, this big, strong guy who was known as kind of the backroom guy who could get shit done, right? He could, break the windows and intimidate the scabs. And, you think of Jay Lovestone, he was kind of I don't know what you want to call him. He's like a hitman in the mafia or something like that. It's like kind of the dark image that we have of like the Teamsters and, Jimmy Hoffa and all that. That's Jay Lovestone. This guy's a boxer. This guy's, that was Jay Lovestone. And then James Cannon was a street preacher, right? One of his compilations of articles. It's called Notebooks of an Agitator. And he used to be a wobbly, and he was just go around putting on shows. They would go from town to town, and they'd have performers and all of that. And James Cannon was a street preacher, basically. And that, he was somebody who was known. And, when one of these political prisoners would be arrested, he and his followers would go from city to city giving, free Tom Mooney, free the Scottsboro Boys, and he was an agitator, basically, for political prisoners. People play different roles, and that's, in a revolutionary movement, people play different roles. And so yeah, James Cannon led the Trotskyite split, right? And James Cannon, I must say, I read when I joined Workers' World Party had a Trotskyite history, and I had always loved William C. Foster. And so I figured I must read James Cannon because he's the father of American Trotskyism. And I read almost every James Cannon book. I read The History of American Trotskyism. I read Notebook of an Agitator. I read, there's a lot, and I still have them. Down here, I got like every book James Cannon ever wrote. I gotta tell you, James Cannon really comes across as a very bitter old man, right? He got the short end of the stick in his view. He was very bitter at the Communist Party. He was very bitter at the Soviet Union. And, whereas Jay Lovestone, he had his group, the Lovestonites, and they were people that were in labor unions that worked with him. And he had just this network of labor union guys who worked with him, and they got kicked out of the Communist Party. So they were just the Lovestonites, and they had their own communist newspaper, and they had their own meetings. They were very small, but they had a lot of labor union people that were loyal to them. And they were in kind of, they were trying to get back into the Communist Party, but they couldn't get back in. And, because of that, they were on the outs. And there were a lot of times that it was like they almost got back into the Communist Party. But then when the CIO was formed, the Congress of Industrial Organizations was formed, and you had that upsurge, you had a lot of people that were involved. The Communist Party was very heavily involved in, the United Auto Workers and the steel workers and all of that. But not everybody involved was a communist, right? There were a lot of labor unionists involved in the labor upsurge of the late 1930s who were not communists. And the Communist Party hated Jay Lovestone. And Jay Lovestone, he wanted to rejoin the Communist Party. They wouldn't let him. And so the way it's told in his biographies, I don't know if this is true or not, but the way they tell it from his point of view is he was kind of forced into being an ally of the Communist Party's enemies. And so in the labor union bureaucracy, if you were against the Communist Party, if you wanted, dirt on Communist Party leaders, if you wanted to know how to fight with the Communist Party for control of the labor union, you went to Jay Lovestone because he was just this expert in fighting the Communist Party because he had been a founder of the Communist Party and he was their enemy. He was their enemy. So he was just kind of known as this labor union boss who was really good at fighting the Communist Party. After World War II, the CIA realized that they needed somebody who could fight the communists in the trade unions throughout Europe. And so the CIA hired him. And he lived up into the Reagan presidency. I believe he was involved in a lot of the CIA's trade union work. And that Jay Lovestone was a very secretive individual. He wasn't very public. Right? He had a network of trade union people who followed him, and he was very smart, and he did teach these people. He was very smart and all of that, but first of all, he was anti-communist. He hated Stalin, he hated the Soviet Union, and he didn't start out that way. He started out as somebody who had a disagreement with the Soviet Union, and then, and he was constantly trying to re-enter an alliance with them and stuff. And it wasn't really until like World War II that he became like the full-on enemy of the Soviet Union. But he was a labor union boss who was on the other side of the Communist Party. And by the late 1930s, that was his selling point. He was really good at fighting the Communist Party and the labor movement. So, Carter, the reason that I kind of responded to your question there. So the Trotskyites will often say that they claim their opposition to Stalin and their opposition to the Communist Party was legitimate because they could form a real political movement, whereas Lovestone just kind of became a CIA agent, and just, his labor union guys just became CIA guys. That they tried for a while to have their own political party, the Communist Party (parenthesis opposition), but they ended up just becoming CIA, right? Well, I mean, that's the argument that Trotskyites make. I don't know if Trotskyism, I would consider it to be a real political movement, right? And Lovestone would hang out with the Trotskyites. I mean, he had no problem. I mean, he spoke at their events, and they would promote him and he would promote them, because they both hated the Soviet Union and they both hated Stalin. So I don't know. I mean, the Lovestoneism is interesting to me. I will say this, and this is a very yeah, well, I mean, Cannon is like a saint to Trots, but I mean, Cannon was the founder of American Trotskyism, and nobody follows Lovestone, because I think he eventually repudiated Marxism. Lovestone was always just a union boss. He was a tough guy who was with the communists at first when they were great union tough guys, and he had a falling out with them, and he eventually became their enemy, and that became his selling point. And the thing about Cannon, though, or about Lovestone, though, is that Lovestone is kind of a bad example. The Communist Party shouldn't have made an enemy out of Lovestone. They should have found a way to get along with him, right? And this is something that I continue to see. In our time, it's even worse. Oh, you disagree with me? Well, fuck you, right? Not every fight has to get down and dirty and ugly, right? And I knew it was only a matter of time before certain people denounced me, and all of that. But at one point I was friendly with Luna Oy, right? And, she came on this channel. I went on her channel. We both defended existing socialist countries, whatever. And then she had a fight with another personality that shall not be named. And I mean, when it came to what they were actually arguing about, if I remember correctly, I agreed with this other personality. But the words that were being used, the language that was being used, the sexual nature of the insults, all of this, I was sitting there shaking my head. It's like, it doesn't have to be this way. Okay, you guys don't agree about whatever, but in a weird way, sure, because it's not that I can relate to Lovestone. It's that it's not that. It's that the communism in America was a brand, all right? And I mean, back then it was far more of a brand than it is now. Anyone can say they're a communist now. But it used to be, to say you were a communist, you had to be aligned with the Communist International. And there were a lot of people fighting to get the official, I am the official Communist Party. And those people were very competitive, right? And you were either with them or against them. And Jay Lovestone wanted to be with them. And even after he was kicked out of the Communist Party, he spent 8-9 years trying to say, I agree with you guys. Let me be your ally. Let me have my communist group kind of align with yours and work with yours. And they wouldn't agree with that. Right? No, you're with us. You're against us. You're a traitor. And it wasn't really until the late 30s that he really solidly became their enemy. And then he became really their enemy. Right? I think Jay Lovestone really, it wasn't about politics for him. He was just a very skilled labor union organizer. And the communists were also. And, communist ideology, would motivate one to become a labor organizer. And he was an effective labor organizer. And the Communist Party was maneuvering in a way that would have hurt his ability to be a labor organizer. His real fundamental disagreement was that the Communist Party said, the Communist International said, we're going to break away from the American Federation of Labor. We're going to organize independent unions. And he couldn't do that because all of his network of contacts, his whole network of people were in the American Federation of Labor. He wasn't going to do that. Jay Lovestone was going to stay in the American Federation of Labor because that's where his life's work was. He had built up this whole network of people in the American Federation of Labor. So he wasn't going to quit the American Federation of Labor. And so when they said to do that, he said, well, look, that might be the right thing to do in the rest of the world, not in America. We got to do it different. So Stalin accused that's American exceptionalism. He was kicked out. Now, they should have found a way, hindsight is 2020. The Communist Party should have found a way to not make Jay Lovestone their enemy. All right. But no, because they were all afraid, right? They were all competing to get Moscow's blessing. And there was a fear that if Jay Lovestone outdid them or something, they might lose favor. So, oh, he's a traitor, he's the enemy, and they're all one-upping each other and how much they can go after Jay Lovestone. And that's why the Communist Party, I will say, McCarthyism, and this is not a popular thing to say, McCarthyism was much more effective because of this. The Communist Party very much had, you're either with us or against us. And, oh, you're Jay Lovestone. Oh, you quit? Well, we don't agree with us on this. Well, fuck you. You're the enemy. Oh, right. And that attitude made the Communist Party so many enemies. And when McCarthyism came, they would have been a lot safer, right? I mean, look, as a matter of principle, you know, you should defend people against McCarthyism. But unfortunately, most people are not, or I shouldn't say most people, many people are not as principled. If the Communist Party had not made enemies out of everybody who wasn't with them, they would have had a lot more people defending them during McCarthyism. But, you know, people like Jay Lovestone, people like, you know, I mean, they had just burnt. It was like you were with them or against them, right? And I see that now in our age when it's not as necessary. There's no Comintern anymore. No one has the official Soviet blessing, like, you know, but I see this, right? And with the Luna thing, right? Luna was going in a liberal direction or whatever, but, you know, I didn't want to burn bridges with Luna. You know, and I saw this other person who was kind of adjacent to our community at the time. It was just, they went apeshit against Luna, and they talked about her they said things that are unforgivable. Just because you disagree with somebody about Trump or about this country or that country, you don't have to insult them in over the top, childish, sexual ways, right? And if somebody does that, right, you need to ask yourself what's going on there. Because I mean, and I've seen this with this particular individual in his community many times, right? Jeff Young used to be friendly with them. In fact, they were boosting Jeff Young at one point. And then there was something, I don't even remember what the disagreement was. And then, oh my God, Jeff Young is a traitor. He's all these things. And you know, and it's like, it's like anybody who you're either with them or against them, right? Well, if you meet somebody like that, you're either with them or against them. You know, look at your watch, because eventually they're going to be against you. You know, and I was doing that. I kind of saw that coming. It was like, I didn't exactly think it would happen the way it did. And I bent over backwards to try and accommodate them. But that's how these things work, right? Is that, you know, if they're incapable of just saying, okay, well, we disagree, you know, if they're not capable of doing that, if it has to be, you know, I mean, you know, then it's only a matter of time before they're going to hate you, right? And you don't have to act that way, right? I mean, somebody, like the way politics works, somebody could be your enemy today and your friend tomorrow, depending on the way things line up. Tucker Carlson, you know, there were times where I really hated Tucker Carlson, but then he stood with the Uhuru movement. Well, sure, I'm sure glad I didn't cuss out Tucker Carlson. I didn't make videos, Tucker Carlson's a piece of shit bag. You know, well, I mean, he has really done a lot of good work over the years, you know, and it's just like, you know, I mean, you have to be strategic. Sometimes some things are worth fighting over and some things are not. And some things are worth fighting over, but not pulling your knives out and not pulling your guns out. Okay. Some things are not worth having a nuclear war over. And, you know, I've noticed that, and this is a really big problem. So it's like the Jay Lovestone thing. Jay Lovestone, ultimately, I don't think was a good guy. Okay. I don't think he really cared that much about communism. He was just a union tough. That's kind of how I see Jay Lovestone. And he wanted to be a communist because communists had an ideology that, you know, made sense to be a union tough. The Soviet Union was a country that backed them up. I mean, he was that, and he was a union tough who wanted to be with them and was one to their ideology. And then he wasn't willing to give up his labor union network, so he became their enemy. And then they went crazy against him. And I mean, allegedly they broke into his apartment and stole from him. And, you know, I mean, and who knows if that's true? I don't know. Anti-communists say all kinds of things. And he was a CIA anti-communist. I'm not saying it's true, but I mean, it looks like they made an enemy out of him, and he didn't really care that much about, he wasn't a principled anti-imperialist. He wasn't, he wasn't a principled communist. He was a union organizer. He was a union tough. And so okay, you want to be my enemy? All right, I'll work for the CIA. I mean, and I mean, that's what he was. Max Shachtman was a similar character. And actually, Max Shachtman and Jay Lovestone kind of paralleled, right? Max Shachtman became the main advisor to George Meany, the head of the AFL-CIO in the 60s, and he became pro-imperialist, and Max Shachtman was totally in bed with the CIA. Max Shachtman and Jay Lovestone. Shachtman was a trot who broke with Trotsky, and it's a similar thing. So, but this is a big problem. This, oh, you disagreed with me on one thing, so now I'm going to call you a Nazi. And that happened. I mean, I disagree with you about one thing, so I'm gonna call you a white supremacist. I'm gonna destroy your reputation. I'm gonna try to get you fired from your job. I'm gonna dox you. I'm gonna, do all kinds of crazy sexual insults about you. It's like, you can't take that stuff back. And I've watched this in our online circles. Again, somebody disagrees with somebody, and it becomes, a blood feud. And often people don't know the whole story, right? Yeah, the loudest and stupidest about it. Yeah, I mean, in our time, I mean, I'm comparing the efforts of labor union organizers. I mean, the Communist Party in Jay Lovestone's day was a real party that had a mass base, and it was a real political party. Nothing that we're doing now is in any way comparable. I mean, we're on social media, we organize protests, but we don't run a labor movement with thousands of people. We're not leading strikes. We're not tied to the Soviet Union. And I mean, come on. But, nowadays it makes even less sense to burn bridges over everything. And one thing that I see is that people don't, it's like, it's like it's like you don't exist. People don't think that, that tweet that they saw by that person or that thing they were told about somebody, it never occurs to them that's not the whole story, right? It's like, I mean, with me, I had all these people. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Caleb who was a transphobe. It's like, I don't even consider myself to be a transphobe. I mean, I've had trans friends. I worked with Leslie Feinberg. I just interviewed Jyoti Brar, and she gave a position which is a pretty reasonable position. She said, there are two genders. People have the right to be who they want to be, but I don't accept that there's more than two genders. I don't accept that you are what you say you are. That's idealism. That's defensible. What's wrong with that? But I interviewed her saying that, and some big streamer, some big, thought slime made a video of it, and thousands of people who knew nothing about me, had no idea I'd risked my life on a ship going to Iran, had no idea that I've got years of anti-racist activism. I've videotaped women being beat up by police. It's like my biography is really long, but apparently all I was is once upon a time there was a guy named Caleb, and he hates trans people. And like, I had people tweet out, I see Caleb streams for hours just about transphobia. I don't, and it was like, that just became my whole identity. That's all Caleb is a guy who hates trans people. And I didn't even hate trans people. I just interviewed somebody who said a position that was critical of a viewpoint that was put out by the trans movement. And it's like, oh, that's all you are, and it's infuriating to me. Right. It's infuriating to me. And that, these, some 12-year-old kid who just started reading Marx yesterday. Well, the first things he learns, there's this guy named Caleb, and he's bad, and they know nothing about me, nothing about all the years that I've worked in this movement, nothing about all the sacrifices I've made, all the real accomplishments I've done. None of that means anything. Apparently, I'm just this guy who is bad. And then they say things about me that are not. Anyway, you've all heard this a million times, and I could go on about this all night, but it's frustrating to me. It really is. And that, again, the burning of the bridges, it never occurs to these people that, maybe there might be a time where we agree on something and we could work together. Maybe at some point there'll be a political prisoner we both support that we could defend. No. It's just, just be as nasty and hateful and call every nasty name in the world and hurl every insult and burn every bridge. And the saddest thing about it is that these people are not doing it for real people. They're doing it for anonymous people on the internet. Right? It's like, well, I better burn bridges with this person who's my friend, because I don't want a bunch of random accounts I've never heard of with anime emojis to stop liking me. It's like you're trying to please anonymous bots and you're burning a bridge with a real person to do it. It's really, really sad. It's really, really sad, and there I honestly believe that a lot of this is COINTELPRO. Um, a lot of this is COINTELPRO. Because yeah, at least Lovestone was doing it for actual political goals, and he represented an actual mass movement, right? I mean, he represented thousands of trade unionists who were loyal to him, and there was the Soviet Union was this country that existed that he wanted to be a relationship, but he couldn't follow their political direction. It's a little bit of a different situation. Nowadays, it's, oh, so-and-so tweeted something I don't like. Well, I better call them a Nazi. I better insult them. And it's just, it's infuriating. I mean, and it's just like nobody understands that if you actually get things done in the real world, you actually have to have friends and allies. Like, that's the whole thing. The biggest cancel I've ever gotten was when I tweeted out that you might be against gay marriage or abortion. I might disagree with you, but you're still my comrade. And I tweeted that out, and I got canceled by all these people. And like, the Nation of Islam, have they ever heard of the Nation of Islam? Minister Louis Farrakhan, he's against gay marriage. He's against abortion. You're saying we can't work with him? The Democratic Party, go to any urban area, the Chicago Democratic Party, they're working with Minister Farrakhan. It's like the Democratic Party on a local level has a very close relationship with the Nation of Islam. And it's just like, it never occurs to these people that, like, political alliances, like, have you ever worked against the death penalty? You think all those Catholic priests and nuns are against the death penalty? Do you think they believe in gay marriage? Do you think they believe in abortion? I don't think so. But it never occurs to people. No, the idea that you would have to tolerate somebody you disagree with. I mean, it's infuriating, right? And again, and that's what I don't appreciate, right? Is that, again, there are people who disagree with me. Fine. There's people who don't want to work with me. Fine. No one's making you work with me. But the level of childish insults and harassment, I mean, I don't know. I could anyway, that's a long thing. But when I think about Lovestone, like, it didn't have to be that way. And that was a fuck up. I believe that was a fuck up on the Communist Internationalist part. They should have found a way that maybe he could leave the Communist Party but not be their enemy, right? And that was a weakness that the Communist Party had, is that Jay Lovestone shouldn't have become their enemy. The Trotskyites is a little bit different because Trotsky was actively anti-Stalin, was putting forward a different political line. Jay Lovestone didn't care about politics. That's kind of the thing about Jay Lovestone. Jay Lovestone, and that's what the Trotskyites will say, well, that proves that we're a legitimate anti-Stalinism, and Lovestone was not. No, Lovestone didn't care about politics. He was just a trade union guy. And that's, if you want to be an effective organizer, you have to be able to organize with people who don't agree with you. You should get guys who just care about unions to not be your enemy, right? That's the point. The Trotskyites, yes, Trotsky had a fundamental difference. He was mobilizing against the Soviet Union. He was mobilizing against Stalin or whatever. Lovestone didn't care. Lovestone just didn't want to dismantle his trade union group, and they should have found a way that Lovestone could not be their enemy. And that really weakened the Communist Party. So there you go. I hope that was helpful, Carter. I hope that was helpful. And I really hope you're reading Out of the Movement to the Masses, because this is all in there, right? Chapter 1 is all about the Communist Party and Lovestone.